Hello everyone. So today I want to start going over a old magazine. It's Weird Tales. Started, as we can see, in March 1923. And we'll go over this over it runs until the 50s, so we got plenty of stuff to go over. But this is where we see a lot of things get introduced for the first time in this magazine. Famously, H.P. Lovecraft makes a lot of stuff in this magazine, as well as Robert E. Howard, the guy who wrote the Conan the Barbarian series. So I just thought it'd be really interesting to kind of go over this. We're probably not going to get through the whole thing today, but to just kind of get an idea of what this time period was like and what kind of stories they were writing. Just as a cool look back, to over 100 years ago. So Weird Tales magazine, the unique magazine, on the cover, 25 cents for a magazine. Nowadays you get a comic and it's like $5 and you get like 20 pages. This is just I'm reading this on a PDF. It's the first part and it's 100 pages. Ain't that crazy? So it's Ooze, an extraordinary novelette by Anthony M. Rudd. The Tale of 1,000 Thrills, complete in this issue. So you get the whole story. Pretty cool. Got nice little artwork. This lady's eyes are a bit weird. So is this guy. Very intense. He's got a knife and what looks to be a shotgun. Got an advertisement on page 1. Get ready for a big pay job. Be an electrical expert. Men like you are needed right now to fill big paying jobs in the electrical field. There never was a time when opportunity for money making was as good as they are now. This is 1920, so, give it 10 years. Good jobs are open everywhere to men who know what's what. Electrical experts earn from $12 to $30 a day. Even the ordinary electricians get top-notch pay. Why don't you get in on this and get a real man's job now? With my simplified electrical course, I can quickly fit you to hold one. Read W.E. Pence's letter below. This is only one of thousands of such letters I have received. Earn $75 to $200 a week at $12 to $30 a day. You can be a big money maker. I've trained over 20,000 men in electrical, thousands of successful men all over the world, attributing their success to my training. I can make you successful too. In fact, I will guarantee your success. If you will follow my home study course, you can become an expert, drawing a fat salary in the same time it takes you to get a little raise in the work you are doing now. Jumps from $125 a month to $750 a month and over. Read the story of W.E. Pence, and we'll look at that in just a little bit. Age or lack of education, no handicap. No matter how old or how young you are or what education you have, there's a real future for you in electricity. If you can read and write, I can put you on the road to success. I can help you to a position that will make people admire you and look up to you. Cash in on your spare time. Use your spare time to get a better job. Most of us have had enough spare time every day to sell a little at about $10 an hour. Sell some to yourself at this price. Watch how quick you will earn the money back if you put in the time into study. The wording on here is a little weird, but that $10 an hour, so in 100 years, I talk to people, you get the idea that about $20 an hour is what you expect, and we know inflation has gone way above that. So either this was a really good job now, then, or things suck right now. And I think it's a bit of both. I guarantee your complete satisfaction. I am so sure I can make a big pay electrical expert out of you that I guarantee your success. I agree under bond to return every cent you pay for me for tuition when you have finished the course. If you are not satisfied that it is the best investment you have ever made, if you don't make good, this $1 million institution will. So, it's basically saying you're going to do good. Electrical working outfit free. Every man who enrolls from an electrical course gets a big outfit of tools, material, and instruments free. This includes an electric motor and other things not usually found in a beginner's outfit. These are the same tools and the same materials you will use later in your work. Everything practical and good right from the start. Now this is interesting. When I was taking a course on HVAC, which is heaters and air conditioning and stuff, and I didn't end up finishing because COVID kind of messed it up. But they wanted you to pay for all your tools yourself, so that's actually a pretty good deal right there. Act right now. Let me send you my big free book giving details of the opportunities electricity offers you, and a simple lesson, also free. Add the coupon and get this at once. Learn how other men got themselves ready to hold good paying jobs, and how I can help you do the same. This is your big chance. Take it. L. Cook, Chief Engineer, Chicago Engineering Works, Department 179, 2150 Lawrence Avenue, Chicago, Illinois. So I wonder how many this ended up working out for. We got the little letter here, W.E. Pence, in his working togs. I don't know what togs are. I imagine that's just an outfit. Chehalis, Washington, October 9th. Mr. Cook, when I enrolled with you less than a year ago, I was a common mechanic earning $25 to $30 a week. Today, I am an electrical expert with a business of my own that gives me a clear profit of over $750 a month. That's not quite the solid $200, but it's in that range, $75 to $200 a week. I have more work than I can do. The people asked Chehalis come to me to fix their starters, generators, and ignition troubles because they know that I know how to do it right. My success I owe to you, Mr. Cook. The thorough practical training which you gave me through your easily learned home study course in electricity has made me an independent, highly respected businessman in this community. Sincerely yours, W.E. Pence. So, at least worked out for this guy. Okay. Weird Tales Unique Magazine by Edwin Baird, editor. This is a little difficult to read. Published monthly by Retail Publishing Corporation. That's just hard to read. I think this is just telling you that they're legally publishing it or whatever. Volume 1, 25 cents. Okay, we're going to skip through. Oh, wow, they got quite a bit in here. Up to 169. So, yeah, 180 pages. All for 25 cents. That's a deal if I ever had one. Goose Flesh Stories. Oh dear. Tales of horror or goose flesh stories are commonly shunned by magazine editors. Few, if any, will consider such a story, no matter how interesting it may be. They believe that the public doesn't want this sort of fiction. We, however, believe otherwise. We believe there are tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, of intelligent readers who enjoy goose flesh stories. Hence, Weird Tales. I've never heard this before. Goose flesh as a synonym for horror stories. I wonder where that comes from. I've never touched a goose. Are they like bumpy? Like you get the little bumps. I've not heard that. So Weird Tales, unique magazine. Weird Tales offers such fiction as you can find in no other magazine. Fantastic stories, extraordinary stories, grotesque stories. Stories of strange and bizarre adventure. The sort of stories, in brief, that will startle and amaze you. Every story in this issue of Weird Tales is an odd and remarkable flight of man's imagination. Some are creepy, some deal in masterly fashion with forbidden subjects like insanity, some are concerned with the supernatural, and others with material things of horror. All are out of the ordinary, surprisingly new and unusual, a sensational departure from the beaten track that is the reason for Weird Tales. So they really want you to know, yeah, we got some crazy stuff going on in here. A radiant bride at 20, at 25. What? Is the husband or wife to blame? Is the husband or wife to blame for the tragedy of too many children? A bride at 20, at 25. Is it saying they have 25 children? Margaret Sanger, the great birth control advocate, comes with a message vital to every married man or woman. Thousands upon thousands of women today marry with the bloom of youth upon their cheeks. A few years of married life rub the bloom off. Children come, too many, and instead of the energetic, healthy girl, we have a tired and bedraggled young old woman. Why do women allow marriage, the holy thing, to work this wicked transformation? Margaret Sanger, the acknowledged world leader of the birth control movement and president of the American Birth Control League, has the answer. For the most momentous problem of womankind, every married woman known only too well the tragedies resulting from ignorance of birth control. Why should a woman sacrifice her love life, a possession she otherwise uses every resource to keep? Why does she give birth to a rapid succession of children if she has neither the means to provide for them nor the physical strength properly to care for them? In her daring and startling book, Margaret Sanger gives the women of the world the knowledge she dared to print, the knowledge for which she faced jail and fought through every court of establishment as women inalienable right to know. In Women and the New Race, she shows how women can and will rise above the force that, in too many cases, have ruined her beauty through the ages that still drag her down today, that wreck her mental and physical strength, that disqualify her for society, for self-improvement, that finally shut her out from the thing she cherishes most, her husband's love. Partial list of content: woman's error and her debt to classes of women, cries of despair. When should a woman avoid having children? I don't think that's too important. In blessing this revolutionary trail to the new freedom of women, this daring and heroic author points out that women who cannot afford to have more than one or two children should not do so. It is a crime to herself, a crime to her children, a crime to society. And now for the first time, Miss Sanger allows the way out, and she brings to the women of the world the greatest message it has been their good fortune to receive. Women and the New Race is a book that will be read wherever womankind struggles with the ever-present danger of too many children. It is a startling, mighty revelation of a new truth, a work that will open the eyes of tired, worn womankind. It can with truth and honesty be called woman's salvation. Every woman in the country should have a copy of this remarkable and courageous work. For this reason, we have an arrangement, a special edition of Women and the New Race at only $2 a copy. Send no money. This book is bound in handsome, durable gray cloth, has artistic black lettering, and is printed from large type on good paper. It contains 234 pages of priceless information. To have it come to you, merely fill in and mail the coupon below. It is sent to you in a plain wrapper. When Women in the New Race is delivered to you by the postman, pay him $2 plus postage and send no money with the coupons. There will be an unprecedented demand for this edition, which will soon be exhausted, so you are urged to mail the coupon now at once. Truth Publishing Company, Department 250. That's just the address. Yeah, so they were really going hard on the on birth control here. Page 5. I'm not sure what this is, but I think this is like a Grim Reaper figure, and there we have a woman. Yeah, so we can kind of see how this all worked out, 100 years later. But that's not for me to comment on. Another advertisement, 21 Jewel Burlington, adjust to the second, adjust to temperance, adjust to only $1 down, only $1 down. Oh, is this a clock? This is a clock. I don't think this is too interesting. We'll just skip on by there. And then I think we're into the actual first story. Wonderful. Only took us 15 minutes. Sorry about that. But I really wanted to go over the ads as well, because at least the first two. Because I think part of the reason I'm doing this is to give an idea of the times, as well as to get a little bit of literary history. So, for weird tales, for scalp-prickling thrills and stark terror, read The Dead Man's Tale by Willard E. Hawkins. The curious narrative that follows was found among the papers of the late Dr. John Pedrick, physical investigator and author of occult works. It bears evidence of having been received through automatic writing, as were several of his publications. Unfortunately, there are no records to confirm this assumption, and none of the mediums or assistants employed by him in his research work admits knowledge of it. I believe automatic writing is referred to like he's writing while possessed. I believe that's what that refers to. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Possibly, for the Doctor was reputed to possess some psychic powers, it may have been received by him. Okay, yeah, so I was right. At any rate, the lack of data renders the recital useless as a document for the Society of the for Physical Research. It is published for whatever intrinsic interest or significance it may possess. With reference to the names mentioned, it may be added that they are not confirmed by the records of the War Department. It could be maintained, however, that purposely fictitious names were substituted either by the Doctor or the communicating entity. So it's saying that Dr. John Pedrick was possessed by some sort of psychic or ghostly being, wrote this piece, and it's a true story, but the names are changed to protect whoever identity, either by the Doctor or whoever was possessing him. They called me when I walked the earth in a body of dense matter, Richard Devaney. Though my story has little to do with the war, I was killed in the Second Battle of the Marne on July 24th, 1918. Many times, as men were wont to do who felt the daily, hourly imminence of death in the trenches, I had pictured that event in my mind and wondered what it would be like. Mainly, I had inclined toward the belief in total extinction, that when the vigorous, full-blooded body I possessed should lie bereft of its faculties, I, as a creature apart from it, should go on, was beyond credence. The play of life through the human machine, I reasoned, was like the flow of gasoline into the motor of an automobile. Shut off that flow, and the motor became inert, dead, while the fluid which had given its power was in itself nothing. And so I confess it was a surprise to discover that I was dead, and yet not dead. So he was some sort of materialist, and found out he was wrong, which I honestly think I think that if you get caught like this, where you think that you're gonna die and just go into nothing happens, you just poof out of existence, I'd be quite happy with any sort of afterlife, I don't like the idea of not existing anymore. I'm fine with not existing before I was born, but I'd like to continue on afterwards in whatever form that might take. I did not make the discovery at once. There had been a blinding concussion, a moment of darkness, a sensation of falling into a deep abyss. Indefinite time afterwards, I found myself standing dazedly on the hillside toward the crest which we had been pressing against the enemy. The thought came that I must have momentarily lost consciousness, yet now I felt strangely free from physical discomfort. What had I been doing when that moment of blackness blotted everything out? I had been dominated by purpose, a flaming desire. Like a flash, recollection burst upon me, and with it a blaze of hatred, not toward the Boche gunners ensconced in the woods above us, but towards the private enemy I had been about to kill. Boche was. Okay, I looked it up. It is a informal derogatory insult towards Germans, Boche gunners. I'd been about to kill. It had been the opportunity for which I had waited interminable days and nights in the open formation. He kept a few paces ahead of me as we alternately ran forward, then dropped on our bellies and fired. I had watched my chance. No one would suspect, with the dozens who were falling every moment under the merciless fire from the trees beyond, that the bullet which ended Louis Winston's career came from a comrade's rifle. Ooh, so he shot a guy on his side. Twice I had taken aim, but withheld my fire, not from indecision, but lest in my vengeful heat I might fail to reach a vital spot. When I raised my rifle the third time, he offered a fair target. God, how I hated him! With fingers itching to speed the steel towards his heart, I forced myself to remain calm, to hold fire for that fragment of a second that would ensure careful aim. So he really hates this guy. And then, as the pressure of my finger tightened against the trigger, came the blinding flash, the moment of blackness. Chapter 2, I had evidently remained unconscious longer than I had realized. Save for a few figures that lay motionless or squirming in agony on the field, the regiment had passed on, to be lost in the trees at the crest of the hill. With a pang of disappointment, I realized that Louis would be among them. Involuntarily, I started onward, driven still by that impulse of burning hatred, when I heard my name called. Turning in surprise, I saw a helmeted figure crouching beside something huddled in the tall grass. No second glance was needed to tell me that the huddled something was the body of a soldier. I had eyes only for the man who was bending over him. Fate had been kind to me. It was Louis. Apparently, in his preoccupation, he had not noticed me. Coolly, I raised my rifle and fired. The result was startling. Louis neither dropped headlong nor looked up at my report. Vaguely, I questioned whether there had been a report of the rifle, not of like. I wonder where that changed, where you go from report being like the firing of a rifle to like a written report. I don't know. I'll look it up later. Thwarted, I felt that the lust to kill mounting in me with redoubled fury. With rifle upraised, I ran toward him. A terrific swing, and I crashed the stock against his head. It passed clear through. Louis remained unmoved, uncomprehending. Snarling, I flung the useless weapon away, and fell upon him with bare hands, with fingers that strained to rend and tear and strangle. Instead of encountering solid flesh and bone, they too passed through him. Was it a mirage, a dream? Had I gone crazy? Sobered for a moment, forgetful of my fury, I drew back and tried to reduce the thing to reason. Was Louis but a figment of the imagination, a phantom? My glance fell upon the figure beside which he was sobbing incoherent words of entreaty. I gave a start that looked more closely. The dead man, for there was no question about his condition, with a body shrapnel wound to the side of his head, was myself. Dun, dun, dun. Gradually, the import of this penetrated my consciousness. Then I realized that it was Luis who had called my name, that even now he was sobbing it over and over. The irony of it struck me at the moment of realization. I was dead. I was the phantom who had meant to kill Luis. I looked at my hands, my uniform. I touched my body. Apparently, I was as substantial as before. The shrapnel buried itself in my head. Yet when I had tried to grasp Luis, my hand seemed to encompass only space. Luis lived, and I was dead. The discovery for a time benumbed my feeling toward him. With impersonal curiosity I saw him close, the eyes of the dead man, the man who, somehow or other, had been me. I saw him search the pockets and draw forth a letter I had written only that morning, a letter addressed to. With a sudden surge of dismay, I darted forward to snatch it from his hands. He should not read that letter. Again I was reminded of my impalpability. Ew. When Luis did not open the envelope, though it was unsealed, he read the superscription, kissed it as sobs rent his frame, and thrust the letter inside his khaki jacket. "Dick! Buddy!" he cried brokenly. "Best pal man ever had. How can I take this news back to her?" My lips curled. To Luis, I was his pal, his buddy. Not a suspicion of the hate I had borne him, ever since I discovered in him a rival for Velma Roth. Ah, the doom of all man, the love of a woman. Oh, I had been clever. It was our unselfish friendship that endeared us both to her. A sound of jealousy, of ill nature, and I would have forfeited the paradise of her regard that apparently I shared with Luis. I had never felt secure of my place in that paradise. True, I could always awaken a response in her, but I must put forth effort in order to do so. He held her interest, it seemed, without trying. They were happy with each other, in each other. Our relations might be expressed by liking her to the waters of a placid pool, Luis to the basin that held her, me to the wind that swept over it. By exerting myself, I could agitate the surface of her nature into rivers of pleasurable excitement, could even lash her emotions into a tempest. She responded to the stimulation of my mood, yet in my absence settled contentedly into the peaceful comfort of Luis's steadfast love. Sorry about that, my alarm went off, but that's for something else. Don't worry about it. I felt vaguely then, and am certain now, with a broader perspective towards realities, that Velma intuitively recognized Luis as her mate, yet feared to yield herself to him because of my sway over her emotional nature. So it seems we got a clear bad boy, good guy kind of contention here. You know, with Luis is kind of like the boring nice guy, and our main character as the, crazy wild boy kind of deal. Classic love triangle setup. The Velma intuitively recognized Luis as her mate. That sounds straight out of like modern incel stuff, or like this feels weirdly modern, like something I'd read on AO3. When the Great War came, we all, I am convinced, felt that it would absolve Velma from the task of choosing between us. Whether the agony that spoke from the violet depths of our eyes when we said goodbye was chiefly for Luis or for me, I could not tell. I doubt if she could have done so, but in my mind was the determination that only one of us should return, and Luis would not be that one. So you're not a very good friend, are you? Did I feel no repugnance at thought of murdering the man who stood in my way? Very little. I was a savage at heart, a savage in whom desire outweighed anything that might stand in the way of gaining its object. From my point of view, I would have been a fool to pass the opportunity. Why I should have so hated him, a mere obstacle in my path, I do not know. It may have been due to an prescience of the intangible barrier between his blood would always raise between Velma and me, or to a slumbering sense of remorse. But speculation aside, here I was, in the state of being that the world calls death, while Luis lived, was free to return home, to claim Velma, to flaunt his possession of all that I held precious. There is more than one girl in the world, dude. You gotta let it go. It'll be okay. It was maddening! Must I stand idly by, helpless to prevent this? I have wondered since how I could remain so long in touch with the objective world, why I did not at once, or very soon, find myself shut off from earthly sights and sounds as those in physical form are shut off from the things beyond. The matter seems to have been determined by my will. Like weights of lead, envy of Luis and passionate longing for Velma held my feet to the sphere of dense matter. Vengeful, despairing, I watched beside Luis, when at last he turned away from my body, and with tears streaming from his eyes, began to drag a useless leg towards the trenches we had left. I realized why he had not gone on with the others to the crest of the hill. He, too, was a victim of Boche gunnery. I walked beside the stretcher bearers when they had picked him up and were conveying him towards the base hospital. Throughout the weeks that followed, I hovered near his cot, watching the doctors as they bound up the lacerating tendons in his thigh and missing no details of his battle with the fever. Over his shoulder, I read the first letter he wrote home to Velma, in which he gave a belated account of my death, dwelling upon the glory of my sacrifice. I have often thought that you two were meant for each other, he wrote, and that if it had not been for fear of hurting me, you would have been his wife long ago. He was the best buddy a man ever had. If only I could have been the one to die. Yeah, so Luis sounds like a real cool guy. You know, we all like a Luis. You know, we don't know Velma at all in this story, but our, titular dead man is a real jerk about it. Had I known it, I could have followed his letter across seas, could, in fact, have passed it, and by an exercise of the will have been at Velma's side in my twinkling of an eye. But my ignorance of the laws of the new plane was total. All my thoughts were centered upon a problem of entirely different character. Never was hold upon earthly treasure more reluctantly relinquished than was my hope of possessing Velma. Surely death could not erect so absolute a barrier. There must be a way, some loophole of communication, some chance for a disembodied man to contend with his corporeal rival for a woman's love. Slowly, very slowly, dawned the light of a plan. So feeble was the glimmer that it would scarcely have confronted one in less desperate straits, but to me it appeared to offer a possible hope. I set about methodically, the infinite patience evolving what's up with the little dots, into something tangible, even though I had but the most indefinite idea of what the outcome might be. The first suggestion came when Luis had so far recovered that but little trace of the fever remained. One afternoon, as he lay sleeping, the mail distributor handed a letter to the nurse, who happened to be standing beside his cot. She glanced at it, then tucked it under his pillow. The letter was from Velma, and I was hungry for the contents. I did not then know that I could have read it. Easily, sealed though it was, in a frenzy of impatience, I exclaimed, "Wake up! Confound it, and read your letter!" With a hand he opened his eyes. He looked around with a bewildered expression. "Under your pillow!" I fumed. "Look under your pillow!" In a dazed manner he put his hand under the pillow and drew forth the letter. A few hours later I heard him comment on the experience of the nurse. Something seemed to have waked me up, and I had a peculiar impulse to feel under the pillow. It was just as if I knew I would find the letter there. The circumstance seemed as remarkable to me as it did to him. It might be coincidence, but I determined to make a further test. So he finds that he's got some ghost powers. Ooh, fun. A test of experience convinced me that I could, to a very slight degree, impress my thoughts and will upon Luis, especially when he was tired, or on the borderland of sleep. Occasionally, I was able to control the direction of his thoughts as he wrote home to Velma. On one occasion, he was describing for her a funny little French woman who visited the hospital with a basket that always was filled with cigarettes and candy. Last time, he wrote, she brought with her a boy whom she called Dots. He paused with pencil upraised, trying to recall the name. A moment later, she looked down at the page and started with astonishment the words, she called him Maurice. That had been added below the unfinished line. I must be going daffy, he muttered. I'd swear I didn't write that. Behind him I stood, rubbing my hands in triumph. It was my first successful effort to guide the pencil while his thoughts strayed elsewhere. Another time he wrote to Velma, I've got a strange feeling lately. The dear old Dick is near. Sometimes, as I wake up, I seem to remember vaguely having seen him in my dreams. It's as if his features were just fading from view. He paused here so long that I made another attempt to take advantage of its abstraction. By an effort of the will that it is difficult to explain, I guided his hands into the formation of the words. With a jugful of kisses for Winkies as ever. Just then, what does kisses for Winky? I've no jugful of kisses. I've never heard that before. Just then, Louis looked down. Good God, he exclaimed, as if he had seen a ghost. Winky was a pet name I had given Velma when we were children together. That is a terrible nickname. What does that even... Over what? I don't even know. Louise always maintained there was no sense in it and refused to adopt it. See, Louis is a real man, you know. He knows. Then when he's a stupid name, he's a nice guy, you know. I like Louis, you know. Dick over here is a real jerk, but Louise, we like Louise. Though I frequently called her by the name in later years, and of his own volition, Louis would never have mentioned anything so convivial as a jug full of kisses. So through the weary months before he was invalided home, I worked. When he left France at the debarkation point, he still walked on crutches, but with the promise of regaining an unassisted use of his leg before very long. Throughout the voyage, I hovered near him, sharing his impatience, his longing for the one who we both held dearest. Over the exquisite pain of the reunion, at which I was present yet not present, I shall pass briefly. More beautiful than ever, more appealing than with her vivid, deep coloring, Velma in the flesh was a vision that stirred my longing into an intense flame. Louise limped painfully down the gangplank. When they met, she rested her head silently on his shoulder for a moment, then, her eyes brimming with tears, assisted him with the tender solitude of a mother to the machine she had in waiting. 2 months later, they were married. I felt the pain of this less deeply than I would have done had it not been, I imagine this is essential, to my design. Whatever vague hope I may have had, however, of vicariously enjoying the delights of love were disappointing. I could not have explained why. I only knew that something barred me from intruding upon the sacred intimacies of their life, as if a defense wall were interposing. It was baffling, but a very present fact, against which I found it useless to rebel. I have since learned, but no matter. So it can't be a peeping Tom about it, or a peeping Dick in this case. This had no bearing on my purpose, which hinged upon the ability I was acquiring of influencing Louis's thoughts and actions, of taking partial control of his faculties. The occupation into which he drifted, restricted in choice as he was by the stiffened leg, helped me materially. Often after interminable shift at the bank, he would plod home at night with brain so weary and benumbed that it was a simple matter to impress upon my will upon him. Each successful attempt, too, made the next one easier. Ooh, so he's possessing the dude. The inevitable consequence was that in time Velma should notice his aberration and betray concern. "Why did you say to me, when you came in last night, 'There's a blue billy goat on the stairs, I wish they'd drive him out'?" she demanded one morning. He looked down shamefully at the tablecloth. "I don't know what made me say it. I seemed to want to say it, and that was the only way to get it off my mind. I thought you'd take it as a joke." He shifted his shoulders as if trying to dislodge an unpleasant burden. "And was that what made you wear a necktie to bed?" she asked ironically. He nodded an affirmation. I know it was idiotic, but the idea kept running in my mind. It seemed as if the only way I could go to sleep was to give it into it. I don't have these freaks unless I'm very tired. She said nothing more at the time, but that evening she broached the subject of his looking for an opening in some less sedentary occupation, a subject to which she therefore constantly recurred. Less sedentary. Oh, okay, so she wants him to get more active. Though if he's always tired, shouldn't he try to go into some more sedentary occupation? Whatever. Then came a development that surprised and excited me with its possibilities. Exhausted, drained to the last drop of his nerve force, Luis was returning late one night from the bank, following the usual month-end overtime grind. As he walked from the car line, I hovered over him, subduing his personality, forcing it under control with the effort of will I had gradually learned to direct upon him. The process can only be explained in a crude way. It was as if I contended with him, sometimes successfully, for possession of the steering wheel of the human car that he drove. Velma was waiting when we arrived, and Luis's feet sounded on the threshold of their apartment. She opened the door, caught his hands and drew him inside. At the action, I felt inexplicably thrilled. It was as if some marvelous change had come over me, and then, as I met her gaze, I knew what that change was. I held her hands in real flesh and blood contact. I was looking at her with Luis's sight. "Don't do that, Dick. Come on. Pass on." The shock of it cost me what I had gained. Shaken from my poise, I felt the personality I had subdued regain its sway. The next moment, Luis was staring at Velma in bewilderment. Her eyes were filled with alarm. You frightened me!" she gasped, withdrawing her hands, which I had all but crushed. "Luis, dear, don't ever look at me again like that." I can imagine the devouring intensity of gaze that had blazed forth from the features in that brief moment when they were mine. Oh, Dick's being weird about it. From the time, my plan quickly took form. Two modes of action presented themselves. The first, and more alluring, however, I was forced to abandon. It was none other than the wild dreams of acquiring exclusive possession of Lucy's body, of forcing him down, out, and into the secondary place I had occupied. Despite the progress I had made, this proved inexpressibly difficult. For one thing, there seemed an affinity between Lucy's body and his personality, which forced me out when he was moderately rested. This bond I might have weakened, but there were other factors. One was the growing conviction on his part that something was radically wrong, with a faculty I had discovered of putting myself in rapport with him and reading his thoughts. I knew that at times he feared that he was going insane. I once had the experience of accompanying him to an alienist. What does that mean? And there, like the proverbial fly on the wall, overhearing learned scientific names applied to my efforts. The alienist spoke of dual personalities, amnesia in the subconscious mind, while I laughed in my, shall I say, ghostly sleep. Is alienist some sort of old-timey word for, psychologist? Or is that more of a pseudoscience psych thing? I've not heard of that. But he advised Luis to seek a complete rest and, if possible, to go into the country to build up physically, which was what I desired most to prevent. I could not play the Mr. Hyde to his Dr. Jekyll if Luis maintained his normal virility. Velma's fears, too, I knew, were growing more acute. As insistently as she could, without betraying too openly her alarm, she pressed him to give up the bank position and seek work in the open air, work that would prove less devitalizing to a person of his peculiar temperament. One of the results of debility from overwork is apparently that it deprives the victim of his initiative makes him fearful of giving up his hold upon the meager means of sustenance that he has, lest he shall be unable to grasp another. Luis was in debt, earning scarcely enough for their living expenses, too proud to let Velma help as long as she longed to do, his game leg putting him at a disadvantage in the industrial field. In fact, he was in just the predicament I desired, but I knew that in time her wishes would prevail. The circumstance, however, that deprived me of all hope of completely usurping his place was this. I could not, for any length of time, face the gaze of Velma's eyes. The personified truth, the purity that dwelt in them, seemed to dissolve my power, to beat me back into the secondary relationship I had come to occupy towards Luis. He was sometimes tempted to tell her, "You give me my one grip on sanity." Oh, that's sweet. You gotta tell people that. You gotta tell them that you love them. I have witnessed his panic at the thought of losing her, at the thought that someday she might give him up in disgust at his aberrations, and abandon him to the formless thing that had haunted him. Curious to be of the world and yet not of it, to enjoy a perspective that reveals the hidden side effects which seem so mysterious from the material side of the veil, but I would gladly have given all the advantages of my disembodied state for 1 hour of flesh and blood companionship with Velma. That's creepy. Don't do that. My alternate plan was this. If I could not enter her world, what was to prevent me from bringing Velma into mine? Ooh, he's gonna kill her. That's mean. Don't do that. Daring, to be sure. Unversed as I was in the laws that govern the mystery of passing from the physical into another state of existence, I could only hope that the plan would work. It might, and that was enough for me. I took a gamblerish chance. By risking it all might gain. The thought of what I might gain transported me to the heaven of pain and ecstasy. Velma and I, in a world apart, a world of our own, free from the sordid trammels of the mar of the perfection of the rosiest earth existence, Velma and I together through all eternity. This much reason I had for hoping. I observed the other persons pass through the change called death, and that some entered a state of being in which I was conscious of them, and they of me. Uninteresting creatures, they were almost wholly preoccupied with their former earth interest, but they were as much in the world as I had been in the world of Velma and Luis, but 4 the fragments of shrapnel ruled me out of the game. A few, it was true, on passing from their physical habitation, seemed to merge into a sphere into which I could not follow. This troubled me. Velma might do likewise, yet I refused to admit the possibility. I refused to consider the possible failings of my plan. That very intensity of my longing would draw her to me. The gulf that separated us was spanned by the grave. Once Velma had crossed to my side of the abyss, there would be no going back to Luis. Yet I was cunning. She must not come to me with overpowering regrets. That would cause her to hover about Luis as I now hovered about her. If I could inspire her with horror and loathing for him, if only I could. As a preliminary step, I must induce Luis to buy the instrument with which my purpose was to be accomplished. This was not easy, for on nights which he left the bank during shopping hours, he was suspiciously vigorous to resist my will. I could work only through suggestion. In a pawnshop window that he passed daily, I noticed a revolver prominently displayed. My whole effort was concentrated upon bringing this to his attention. The second night he glanced at the revolver, but did not stop. 3 nights later, drawn by a fascination for which he could not have accounted, he paused and looked at it for several minutes, fighting an urge that seemed to command him, "Step in and buy! Buy! Buy!" When, a few evenings later, he arrived home with a revolver and a box of cartridges that the pawnbroker had included in the sale, he put them hesitantly out of sight in a drawer of his desk. He said nothing about his purchase, but the next day, Velma came across the weapon and questioned him regarding it. Visibly confused, replied, "Oh, I thought we might need something of the sort. Saw it in a window, and the notion of having it sort of took hold of me. There's been a lot of housebreaking lately, and it's just as well to be prepared." And now with impatience I waited for the opportunity to stage my denouncement. It came naturally at the end of the day, when Louis, after a prolonged day's work, returned home soon after midnight, his brain benumbed with poring over interminable columns of the figures. When his feet ascended to the stairs of his apartment, it was not his faculties that directed him, but mine. Cunning, alert, aflame with deadly purpose. Never was more weird preliminary to a murder. The entering, in guise of a dear familiar form, of a friend incarnate, intent upon destroying the flower of the home. I speak of a friend incarnate, even though I was that fiend incarnate, for I did not enter Louise's body in the full expression of my faculties. Taking up physical life, my recollections of existence as a spirit entity was always shadowy. I carried through the denominating impulses that had actuated me on entering the body, but scarcely more. And the impulse I had carried through the night was the impulse to kill. With utmost caution, I entered the bedroom. My control of Louise's body was complete. I felt, for perhaps the first time, so corporeally secure that the vague dread of driving out did not oppress me. The room was dark, but the soft, regular breathing of Velma asleep reached my ears. It was like the invitation that arises in the scent of old wine, which the lips are about to quaff. Quickening my eagerness and settling my brain on fire, it did not think of love. I lusted, but my lust was to destroy that beautiful body, to kill. However, I was cunning. With caution, I felt my way toward the desk and secured the revolver, filling its chambers with leaden emissaries of death. When all was in readiness, I switched on the light. She wakened almost instantly. As the radiance flooded the room, a startled cry rose to her lips. It froze unuttered as, half rising, she met my gaze. Her beauty, the raven blackness of her hair, falling over her bare shoulders, the full heaving bosom, fanned the flame of my glory passion into fury. In the ecstasy of triumph, I stood drinking in the picture. While I temporized with the lust to kill, prolonging the exquisite sensation, she was battled for self-control. Louise! The name was gasped through bloodless lips. Involuntarily I shrank, reeling a little under her gaze. A dormant something seemed to rise in a feeble protest at what I sought to do. The leveled revolver wavered in my hand. Ooh. But the note of panic in her voice revived my purpose. I laughed, mocking. Louise! Her tone was sharp, edged with horror. Louise, put down that pupil. You don't know what you are doing. She struggled to her feet and now stood before me. God, how beautiful. How tempting that bare white bosom. Stop staring at her tits, dude. Put down the pistol, she ordered hysterically. She was frantic with fear, and her fear was like the blast of a forge upon the white heat of my passion. I mocked her. A shrill, maniacal laugh burst from my throat. She had said I didn't know what I was doing, and yes, I did. I'm going to kill you! Kill you! I shrieked and laughed again. She swayed forward like a wraith as I fired, or perhaps that was the trick, played by my eyes as darkness overwhelmed me. A few fragmentary pictures stained out of my recollection like clear-etched cameos on the scroll of the past. One is of Louise, standing dazedly, slightly swaying as with vertigo, looking down at the smoking revolver in his hand. On the floor before him, a crumpled figure in ebony white and vivid crimson. Then a confusion of frightened men and women in oddly assorted, nondescript attire, uniformed officers bursting into the room and taking the revolver from Louise's unresisting hand. Clumsy efforts at lifting the white-robed body to the bed, a crimson stain spreading over the sheet, a doctor, attired in the collarless shirt and wearing slippers, bending over her. Finally, after a lapse of hours, a hushed atmosphere, efficient nurses, the beginning of delirium. And one other picture of Louise, cringing behind the bars of his cell, denied the privilege of waiting his wife's bedside, crushed, dreading the hourly announcement of her death. Filled with the unspeakable horror of himself, Velma still lived. The bullet had pierced her left lung, and life hung by a tenuous thread. Hovering near, I watched with dispassionate interest the battle for life. For the time I seemed emotionally spent. I had made a supreme effort. Events would now take their inevitable course, and I show whether I had accomplished my purpose. I felt neither anxious nor overjoyed, neither regretful nor triumphant, merely impersonally curious. A fever set in lessening Velma's slender chances of recovery. In her delirium, her thoughts seemed always of Louise. Sometimes she breathed his name pleadingly, tenderly, then cried out in terror at some fleeting rehearsal of the scene on which he stood before her, the glitter of insanity in his eyes, and the leveled revolver in his hand. Again she pleaded with him to give up his work at the bank, and at other times she seemed to think of him as over on the battlefields of Europe. Only once did she apparently think of me, which she whispered the name which I had called her, Winky, and added Dick. But save for this exception, it was always Louise. Her constant reiteration of his name finally dispelled the apathy of my spirit. Louise! All the vengeful fury toward him I had experienced when my soul went hurtling into the region of the disembodied returned with thwarted intensity. When Velma fever subsided, when the long flight for recovery began, and she fluttered through the borderland back into the realm of the physical, when I knew I had failed, balked of my prey, I had at least this satisfaction. Never again would these two, the man I hated and the woman for whom I hungered, never again would they be to each other as they had been in the past. The perfection of their love had been irretrievably marred. Never would she meet his gaze without an inward shrinking. Always on his part, both of their parts, there would be an undercurrent of fear, and the incident might reoccur, a grisly menace poisoning each moment of their lives together. I had not schemed and contrived and dared in vain. This was the thought I hogged upon Louise when released from jail. Upon her refusal to prosecute, it caused me sardonic amusement when, in their first embrace, the tears of despair rained down their cheeks. It recurred when they began their pitiful attempts to build anew on the shattered foundation of love, and then creepingly, shyly, like a bird of ill omen, casting the shadow of its silent wings over the landscape, came retribution. Many times, in retrospect, I lived over that brief hour of my return to physical expression, my hour of realization. Wraith-like arose a vision of Velma, as she had stood before me that night, staring at me with horror. I saw the horror deepen to abject despair. How beautiful she had looked! But when I tried to picture that beauty, I could recall only her eyes. It mattered not whether I wished to see them, they filled my vision. They seemed to haunt me. From being vaguely conscious of them, I became acutely so. Disconcertingly, they looked out at me from everywhere, eyes brimming with fear, eyes fixed and staring, filled with horrified accusation. The beauty I had once coveted became a thing forbidden, even in memory. If I had sought to peer through the veil as formerly, to witness her pathetic attempts to resume the old life with Louise, again those eyes. It may perhaps sound strange for a disembodied creature, one whom you would call a ghost, to wail of being haunted, yet haunted is of the spirit, and we of the spirit world are immeasurably more subject to its conditions than those whose consciousness is centered in the material sphere. God, those eyes! There is a refinement of physical torture which consists of the allowing water to fall drop by drop for eternity of hours upon the forehead of the victim. Conceiving of this torture increases 1,000-fold, and a faint idea may be gained of the torture that was mine from seeing everywhere, constantly, indeterminably, two orbs ever filled with the same expression of horror and reproach. Much have I learned since entering the land of the shades, and in that time I did not know, as I know now, that my punishment was so afflicted from without, but the simple result of natural law. Claws set in motion must work out their full reaction. The pebble cast into a white pool makes ripples which in time return to the place of their origin. I had cast more than a pebble of disturbance into the harmony of human life, and though my preoccupation in a single aim had delayed longer than usual the reaction, I had created for myself a hell. Inevitably I was drawn into it. Gone was ever desired and known, to hover near the two who had so long engrossed my attention. Haunted, harried, scourged by those dreadful accusers, I sought to fly from them to the ends of the earth. There was no escape, yet driven, frantic, I still struggled to escape, because that is the blind impulse of suffering creatures. The emotions that had so swayed me when I had tried to blast the lives of two who held me dear now seemed puny and insignificant in comparison with my suffering. No physical torment could be likened to that which engulfed me until my very being was but a seething mass of agony. Through it I hurled malediction upon the world, upon myself, upon the Creator. Horrible blasphemies I uttered, and at last I prayed. It was but a cry for mercy. The inter, inter, inter inarticulate appeal of a tortured soul for surcease of pain, but suddenly a great peace seemed to have come upon the universe. Bereft of suffering, I felt like one who has ceased to exist. Out of the silence came a wordless response. It beat upon my consciousness like the buffeting of waves. Words known to human ears would not convey the meaning of the message that was borne upon me, whether from outside source or welling up from within, I did not know. All I know is that it filled me with a strange hope. 1,000 years or a single instant, for time is a relative thing, the respite lasted. Then I sank, as it seemed, to the old level of consciousness, and the torment was renewed. Endured it now, I knew that I must, and why, a strange new purpose filled my being. The light of understanding had dawned upon my soul, and so I came to resume my vigil in the home of Velma and Louise. Oh, what conclusion has he come to? A brave heart was Velma's, dauntless and true, with the effects of the tragedy still apparent in her pallor and weakness, and in the shaken demeanor and furtive, self-distrustful attitude of Louise. She yet succeeded in finding a place for him as overseer of a small county estate. I said that I ceased to feel the torment of passion for Velma in the greater torment of her reproach. But I had never ceased to love her. As I now realized, I had desecrated that love, had traumatized it into a horrible travesty, had, in my abysmal ignorance, sought to obtain what I desired by destroying it, yet beneath all I had loved. Well, I know now that I had succeeded in my intention toward her. Velma would have ascended to a sphere utterly beyond my comprehension. Merciful fate had averted my aim, had made possible some faint restitution. I returned to Velma, loving her with a love that had come into its own, a love unselfish, untainted by thought of possession. But to help her, I must again hurt her cruelly. Oh dear! Out of the chaos of her life, she had slowly restored a semblance of her money. Almost she succeeded in convincing Louise that her old peaceful companionship had returned, but to one who could read her thoughts, the nightmare thing that hovered between them weighed cruelly upon her soul. She was never quite able to look into her husband's eyes without a lurking suspicion of what might lie in their depths, never able to compose herself for sleep without a tremor lest she should wake to find herself confronted by a fiend in his form. I had done my work only too well. Now slowly and inexorably I began again undermining Louise's mental control. The old ground must be traversed anew, because he had gained in strength from the respect I had allowed him in his outdoor life, gave him a mental vigor with which I had not been obliged to contend before. On the other hand, I was equipped with new knowledge of the power I intended to wield. I shall not relate again the successive stages by which I succeeded. First, in influencing his will, then in partially subduing it, and finally in driving his personality into the background for indefinite periods. The terror that overwhelmed him when he realized that he was becoming a prey to his former aberrations may be imagined. To shield Velma, I performed my experiments when possible while he was away from her. But she could not long be unaware of the moodiness, the haggard droop of his shoulders, which accompanied his realization that the old malady had returned. The deep and terror in her expressions was like a scourge upon my spirit, but I must wound her in order to cure. More than once I was forced to exert my power over Louise to prevent him from taking violent measures against himself. As I gained the ascendancy, determined to end it all grew upon him. He feared that unless he took himself out of Velma's life, the insanity would return, and force him again to commit a frenzied assault upon the one he had held most dear. Nor could he avoid seeing the apprehension in her manner that told him she knew, the shrinking that she bravely tried to conceal. Through my power over him was greater than before, it was intermittent. I could not always exercise it. I could not, for example, prevent his borrowing a revolver one day from a neighbor farmer on pretense of using it against a marauding dog that had lately visited the poultry yard. Though I knew his true intention, the utmost that I could do, for his personality was strong at the time, was to influence him to postpone the deed he contemplated. That night I took possession of his body while he slept. Velma lay, breathing quietly in the next room, for as this dread thing came upon him, they had, through tacit understanding come to occupy separate bedrooms. Partially dressing, I stole downstairs and out to the tool shed where Luis, fearing to trust it near him in the house, had hidden the revolver. As I returned, my whole being rebelled at the task before me, yet it was unavoidable if I would restore to Velma what I had wrenched from her. Quietly though I entered her room, a gasp, or rather a quick hysterical intake of breath, warned me that she had wakened. I flashed on the light. She made no sound. Her face went white as marble. The expression in her eyes was that which had tortured me into the depths of a hell more frightful than any conceived by human imagination. A moment I stood swayed before her, with levelled revolver, as I had stood on that occasion months before. Slowly I lowered the revolver and smiled, not as Luis would have smiled, but as the maniac, formed in his likeness, would have smiled. Her lips formed the word Luis, but in the sound of despair she made no sound. It was the despair not merely of a woman who felt herself doomed to death, but of a woman who consigned her loved one to a fate worse than death. Still I smiled with the growing difficulty, for Luis' personality was restive, and my time in the usurped body was short. In that moment I was not anxious to give up his body. At this new glimpse of her beauty, though physical sight, my love for Velma flamed into hitherto unrealized intensity. For an instant my purpose in returning was forgotten. Forgotten was the knowledge of the ages which I had slipped since last I occupied the body in which I faced her. Forgotten was everything save Velma. As I took a step forward, my arms outstretched, my eyes expressing God knows what depths of yearning, she uttered a scream. Blackness surged over me. I stumbled. I was being forced out. That cry of terror had vibrated through the soul of Luis, and he was struggling to answer it. Instinctively, I battled against the darkness, clung to my hard-won ascendancy. A moment of conflict, and again I prevailed. Once more I smiled. The effect of it must have been weird, for I was growing weaker, and Luis had returned to the attack with overwhelming persistence. My tongue strove for expression. Sorry, Winky, it won't happen again. I'm not coming back. When I recovered from the momentary unconsciousness that accompanied transition from the physical to the spiritual, Luis was looking in affright at the huddled figure of Velma, who had fainted away. The next instant he had gathered her in his arms, though I had come near failing in the attempt to deliver my message. I had no fear that my visit would prove in vain. With clear prescience, I knew that my utterance of that old familiar nickname Winky would carry untold meaning to Velma. That hereafter she would fear no more that she might see in the depths of her husband's eyes, that with the return of her old confidence in him, the spectre of apprehension would be banished forever from their lives. Oh, that was good. I liked that. So that's the end of the story. I think we're going to cut here. I'll do a short little review thing, and then we'll cut off and we'll get to Ooze, a novella of 1,000 thrills. We'll do that tomorrow. But yeah, I thought it was a really good story. I got really into it at the end there. I don't know why he thought he needed to show up with the gun the second time, but that's really my only thing with the story that I didn't fully approve of. I thought this was really good. So yeah, let me know what you think. Like and subscribe. I'll be doing Ooze next time. We didn't get as far into this as I thought we would. But I don't really want to go, took us like 45 minutes to read that. I don't really want to go for another 45. So I'll leave that here and pick up tomorrow. But anyway, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.